We can start off by, me just sort of giving a rundown of like what happened. I'll give a pretty detailed like overview of like my understanding of what's been going on, and then I'll just turf it to you and you tell me what you think. Um, okay, so I'm gonna start like way back in the story, right? So, as you know, Silicon Valley Bank is a bank that did a lot of business with a lot of VC startups and a lot of hedge funds in the Silicon Valley space. So, if you had a startup, you would go to Silicon Valley Bank. Now, go back in time in 2020 and 2021 when, everyone was getting rich and there was helicopter money everywhere. And if you wanted to, have a startup, all you needed was like a deck and, some Asian dude with who looked really smart, and someone would give you like $100 million, right? So that was the world we were living in back in 2021. And so all of these startups and VCs were just like they just had a ton of money. Uh, they were just awash with money, and they needed a bank to put it in. And Silicon Valley Bank is usually the bank that does those services. So in 2021, Silicon Valley Bank's deposits just went through the roof. Everyone was just giving them a shit ton of money because they just had so much coming in. And they weren't able to really lend that money out to anybody, right? No one was looking for loans because everyone just had so much money. No one actually needed a loan. So they ended up having something like $150 billion of deposits during this time. I'm not sure how much of it came during 2020, 2021, but a lot of it came during that helicopter money crazy fever dream of 2021 that we had. And the brilliant bank managers at the time, they're like, well, we need to do something with this money because no one wants to, take a loan from us, and it's just sitting in our coffers not doing anything. Let us go ahead and invest it in something. And what they decided to do is they decided to invest it in mortgage-backed securities. Now, as you may know, mortgage-backed securities are you take a whole bunch of mortgages, you put them together in one bucket, and you slap on a credit rating, and then you just sort of like trade it as a full package on exchanges, and it's been around forever, right? So they bought a whole bunch of those. Those are actually pretty safe investments, right? Because the underlying assets behind them are mortgages, and the market has actually learned its lesson from 2008, and they no longer package these mortgages with like toxic garbage. So you can actually get high grade mortgage-backed securities that don't have any toxic, mortgages, slipped underneath due to some voodoo accounting. So they're like, well, let's just do the safe thing and buy these mortgage-backed securities. Now, and this is where they kind of made a mistake, right? What the big mistake they made is that they put $80 billion of all the deposits they had into long-term maturity mortgage-backed securities. And so that means the bucket of mortgages they got, they matured in 10 years. So when 10 years pass, they get all their money back. And in the meantime, every now and then they'll get an interest payment, right? But they're locked in on that rate of interest payments for 10 years. And they're just stuck for 10 years with an interest payment of whatever it is they managed to get when they bought those. Now, in 2021, as you know, interest rates were not going up. They were still low. So the interest rates they were getting on this $80 billion of mortgage-backed securities was a measly peasly 1.5%, right? And then what happened is that the Fed decided to raise rates. Mm-hmm. So now today, if you want to get a mortgage, you're going to have to pay 6%. And today, if you have a mortgage-backed security bucket, a package together, it's yielding way more than 1.6%. It's yielding 4 or 5%, right? And so anyone who had a bucket of mortgage-backed securities they bought about 2 years ago, that is worth, if you want to sell it for any reason at all, you're going to get way less money for it because your shitty mortgage-backed security bucket is yielding only 1.5%, and the new ones are yielding 5%. So if you want to get it off your hands before the 10 years are up, you're going to have to sell it at a loss. You have just no choice about it. Now, so the feds were hiking interest rates, and the mortgage-backed securities, even though they were locked in for 10 years and they were getting regular like payments on it, they were depreciating in value. Now that alone is not a problem, but the additional problem that occurred is because the interest rates went up and the helicopter money era ended, money was suddenly hard to come by in the VC world and the Silicon Valley world. So no longer was money coming in. Money was now starting to come out. People are like, well, the money we gave you, we're going to just need it to run our businesses, and we're going to need it for payroll and all the other stuff people usually need money for. So the arrow of money was moving in the opposite direction. Some of the other things that were happening is some of these startups and VCs were taking their money out and putting them themselves in treasuries, right? So if you can just get a U.S. bond that yields 4 or 5%, I think a 2-year now yields 5%. Why the hell won't you just put your money in a treasury and just yield some that way? So money was exiting, not coming in, and the stuff that they had bought with the 80 billion when the helicoptered in was yielding only 1.5%. And so as the money coffers were emptying, the bank was like, oh crap, we actually need to get money back into our bank coffers. We need liquidity. What do we do? Well, unfortunately, we're stuck with these stupid mortgage-backed securities, but we have no choice at all but to sell them at a loss. And so they did sell a whole bunch at a loss, and they ended up eating about $1.8 billion, I think was the loss that they incurred on selling some, just so they could get the coffers, up again. And around the time they were doing that, wouldn't you know it, Silvergate Bank also collapsed, right? Just really bad timing. And then a week later, the Silicon Valley Bank actually announced that, hey, we're having some minor liquidity issues, nothing to worry about, folks, and nothing to see. But we did end up selling some MBS, mortgage-backed securities MBS for a loss, and we're also raising capital. Now, the reason that they were scrambling to do this is because Moody's, the rating agency, saw the mess they were in and called them up and like, hey guys, we see you're really underwater here and money is leaving your coffers, so we're going to actually downgrade your bank in terms of rating. And so when this was happening, the bank is like, okay, what do we have to do to make sure our rating is up? And they said, well, you're going to have to sell securities, you're going to have to sell your own shares to raise capital. And all of these conversations became public around about a week after Silvergate collapsed, right? Which collapsed, a few weeks ago. And at this point, the VCs got wind of what was going on, and they started doubting, are you guys even liquid? If we want our money tomorrow, do you even have enough? And that's all it sort of took for a bank run to happen. There's people who say that Peter Thiel started it, but I don't think it really matters who started it or not. But there was enough loss of confidence in how underwater this bank was, because they made a stupid mistake of buying these 10-year maturity bonds, right? If they just bought 1-year treasuries or 2-year treasuries, at most they'd be underwater for a year, and then they get all their money back and they just put it in new treasuries that yield higher. So they did a really dumb thing by making these really long-term sort of mortgage-backed security bets, not thinking even for a second that interest rates are going to go up and their MBS is going to go down in value. So that's a giant mistake they made. And here we are, they're bankrupt. And then when this whole thing happened, it exposed in the banking system the idea that, this bank is not the only bank that did this. Maybe other banks didn't buy such long-term securities, that's fine. But many other banks also bought securities 2 years ago or a year ago or whatever it was, right? Because the interest rates jacked up so fast that even if you bought a year ago, you're significantly underwater now because the newer treasuries and bonds are worth way more than the older ones, because 1 year is is usually not a very long span of time in the financial market, but it is in this instance because the interest rates went up so fast. And so the whole market was looking at all these smaller regional banks, and Silicon Valley is a regional bank. It's not a systemically important bank. And the whole market was like, well, if they're in this hot water, all, the Farmers Market Bank of Ohio, might be in the same predicament. And when the bank collapsed on Friday, there was a huge sort of concern raised by the VC people who says, well, number one, we want our fucking money that we deposited. That's the first thing, because, half of all the startups in America use this bank. And if they lose their money, then we're going to kill innovation for a decade. Whether that's true or not is irrelevant, really. But the other conversation that was being had is, well, a lot of other banks are in the same predicament. What if there's a bank run come Monday and suddenly we find out that the emperor has no clothes and the whole banking system collapses? Now, this is not the same thing as 2008, where one of the giant banks created toxic assets that everyone was holding on to, and we find out the assets have no value. That's not the situation. It's a different mechanism of how the instability came about. And it's very fortunate this all happened on a weekend, right? Because if it happened on a Monday, then you would have the entire 5 days of a bank running occurring. But the problem kind of started on a Friday. The bank closed and was shuttered on a Friday, and then you had the weekend where the government actually had some space to do something about it, and they decided to do some extraordinary things, which is they said, hey, those MBS that you bought, that are actually worth whatever, like 30% less or 40% less today than they were when you bought them. We will take that as collateral from you, and we will value it at par. So we will value it for whatever you bought it for. We won't value it at the current market rate. So they're just going to pretend that it was worth as much as it was when they bought it 2 years ago. And they're just going to allow any bank not any bank, I think there's a few banks that are allowed to do this. They'll allow banks to borrow money on securities that they're underwater on and bonds that they're underwater on when those bonds are valued at par. So some sort of accounting magic trick is occurring here, and the Fed will basically just loan them money. They're like, you give us this collateral and we'll loan you the amount, and if you have a liquidity crunch, right? So that's a fund that they created for, I think they put $25 billion in that. And today is it's Monday today, right? Yeah, it is Monday.
Tuesday, right? Tuesday.
No, it's Tuesday. Sorry, yeah, it is Tuesday. So today's Tuesday. The banking sector has not yet collapsed, right? But this was very much a concern on Sunday. And, me and you have always talked about this podcast about monetary policy. The dollar system is a monetary network. Bitcoin is a monetary network. And the dollar system's monetary network has a lot of pillars and gears and everything. And part of the gears is the Fed and the banking system. And it seems that the gear is kind of locked up a little bit, and the whole system was at the risk of just breaking apart. And today we're seeing a huge rally in Bitcoin. I don't know to what extent that's because people are saying, well, maybe Bitcoin is actually a better monetary network or not. But that's sort of my 30,000 foot view of the whole thing. What are your thoughts? We haven't actually talked about this in person, so I'm curious to hear what you think.
It's I don't know. I feel like there's 1,000 ways to take this. I think when the story first broke, I know we beat up on him, but I think one of the things that Warren Buffett is just known for, and the reason he's built his empire, he's very macro, right? And he says, when the tide goes out, you get to see who is skinny dipping, and it's one thing I love. If you've seen the movie Big Short, there's that scene there. He's like, tell me the difference between illegal and stupid. I'll have my brother-in-law arrested. And I think that's the problem, like what you just said with the helicopter money. I think you've nailed that too. Like that puts all a pin on all of this. I think the problem is the last 24 to, you could argue the last 20 years, but especially the last 24 to 36 months, 50% of all the dollars, I'm going to repeat this for the people at home, 50% of all the U.S. circulating dollars, whether they're tangible or digital, have been created in under the last 36 months. So I think we all saw it during COVID. I mean, everything from Dogecoin to AMC to gold to, zombie-like oil company funds, just everything just went up in price. And I think the problem with that is, I know I keep quoting people here, but like Peter Schiff, he says the biggest problem with monetary networks, whether it's Bitcoin, gold, the US dollar, you need ebbs and flows, like you work hard, you play hard, you sleep hard, etc. Well, we basically partied hard for over 12 years, and then there was a little crack in the system, and then, like you said, helicopter money. So we basically went on an alcohol binge for 12 plus years, and it's like, I guess my whole point with this is what's the hangover going to look like? And, in the last couple months with the meetups, whether it's talking to Sanad or Isaac or other people, they'll bring up the CPI numbers or the inflation numbers or the GDP or blah, blah, blah. And I kind of scoff a little bit because they're pretty smart dudes, but sometimes they'll be like, oh, things are getting better. I'm like, first off, I think all these numbers are a lie. But second of all, what are they basing this off of? A couple years ago, when was, to my point, we haven't really had rational markets, you can argue, in 20 years. So I guess my base point with this is, it's is the contagion contained, and I know we were talking about this in other episodes. I'm still thumping that 10K Bitcoin bandwagon just because we've always talked about the price and value. And back to my point, did Silicon Valley get greedy or reckless or didn't do fiduciary duties? I don't think so. But same thing, what has been one of the biggest markets since 2008? Silicon Valley, and they basically have kind of been the Wild West. Just throw money at a wall, see what sticks, see what doubles, see if you get another Facebook or Amazon. So I think my point with this is just stuff was going to start blowing. And to your point, it's not a coincidence in, let's call it a week. What we had Silvergate, we had Silicon Valley, and then Signature Bank. So it was unfortunate that it happened. A lot of people were like, "Oh, making the joke, who's going to bank the bankless now?" Some crypto companies got wrapped up in this, but I mean, like you, when I first heard this, it's just we had fun money the last 36 months, and the contagion still spreads. That's kind of my first synopsis on it. Not really surprised.
Yeah, it has really put the screws on Jerome Powell because Lynn Alden, said this about a year ago when the Fed rates were going up, and she said, they're going to keep raising rates until something breaks.
Yeah.
And you could very much argue that something is broken. The rates went up so fast that the people who have been, leaders of banks, for the last 15 years, or, have been in the banking center for the last 15 years, have been used to a low interest rate environment. And I don't think they had the muscle memory to like even think
Oh,
about
hell no.
a scenario where interest rates are higher and what even happens in those situations, right? Oh, maybe I need to rebalance, right? Because their muscle memory, if you've been in banking for the last 10, 15 years, is just low interest rates the whole time around. So they don't even know how to operate. I mean, you can have an entire 15 year career in banking and just not have any experience of what it's like to have non-negative, non-zero interest rates. So maybe that was part of the problem, but it really just boils back down to the issue of, we're living in a sort of economy or a monetary network where the Fed is just sort of manipulating things. Oh, today the interest rate is going to be this, and tomorrow it's going to be this, and today we will allow this much money to enter the economy. And I understand that there's probably a need for some measure of control, right? It's a very blunt instrument to decide how much money to put into the economy and how much to take out. It's like you're trying to do surgery with like a blunt knife or a fork, even. And, maybe there's an alternative world where if you don't have that tool, then something like COVID would have, been more economically devastating. This is something Jordan Peterson talked about once as well when he was asked about Bitcoin. He's like, I understand that you want a hard money where you can't just inflate the supply when it's convenient and, it's a deflationary in nature. But he also points out that we've never run an experiment where the world works on such a monetary network, right? So, he also sort of said, be careful what you wish for, because if you do, and you are in an environment where it would actually be really convenient to inflate money for a while, you may not be able to if the world runs on Bitcoin, right? I don't think we're going to have a world that runs entirely on just like Bitcoin. I really don't believe that. But at the same time, it can go too far the opposite direction where there's so much funny money stuff happening. We're going to increase rates now, or hey, inflation is transitory. Oh, we're not worried about inflation. Oh, actually, we are worried about inflation. Oh, actually, inflation is terrible. And now we're at a place where, yeah, inflation is here, and what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
So it's, Jerome Powell is in a really tough spot. Today, the CPI numbers came out as well, and inflation is downtrending, but it's not zero. It's not down to 2%, and it's down from where it was a few months ago. But there's no telling that it's not going to go right back up. We just don't have a good sense of where it's going to trend. So he's in a really difficult predicament. There's a lot of people that are saying that, well, something broke now. A lot of people, and we've talked about this before as well, information is just so commonplace. Like a pleb like me, like I'm not a finance guy at all, right? I understand this stuff now, not because I'm intelligent, it's because there's just so much good information about this now, right?
Well, and free too. That's the kicker.
It's all free,
like
exactly.
Lynn Alden's free newsletter. Like, sorry to cut you off, but I don't know if you follow. But even her free newsletter, like I would easily pay $10 for it, and then like her good one's only $10 a month, and it's just like AAA.
In fact, like when this whole thing was going down on Thursday or Friday morning or whatever, I wasn't really understanding it. I just heard about this I never heard of Silicon Valley Bank, by the way, before like this whole crisis started.
Oh, yeah, same, yeah.
But the way that I learned about it or understood what was going on was Anthony Pompliano did like a 7-minute like thing on his own podcast or whatever, right? And he explained it beautifully. I completely understood what it meant. And the things that I didn't understand, I just asked like ChatGPT, right? And between the two things, like in 15 minutes, you have a really good understanding of what's going on if you have any interest in following the news, right? And of course, I'm not going to CNN to figure it out, right? I'm going to these other sources, and I'm putting it together myself. But I'm not a special person at all. I'm not particularly intelligent. There's many people who are doing exactly what I'm doing. So what I'm getting at is that because of like the sort of decentralized nature of information, because how fast information spreads, everyone who has any like money and capital and just cares about the economy because they have money invested in the system understands what just happened, right? They understand that the banking sector was basically exposed as having, no clothes on, swimming naked when the tide went out. And many, many other banks are also deeply underwater. So the question arises, well, how many other banks are just like one bank run away from being for being seized? And if it wasn't for these like just weekend, last minute sort of plugging of the hole
yeah.
that the Fed did, we would have seen perhaps many more banks failed, and this could have. I mean, but for the grace of God, this happened on a weekend, right? I think that's literally what saved the system. Is it just happened on a weekend, and the Fed like just had like just a day or two to just take stock of what the situation was and like, okay, we're going to fix it. But if the banks were down tremendously on Friday, they were like down.
Oh yeah, they got skinned
on
alive. Yeah.
Now, what if that process started on a Monday, right? It started on a Thursday, I think, and then another day of going down, but it was just 2 days of exposure. And then within 48 hours, the Fed stepped in and sort of stopped the hemorrhaging. And now I think today bank stocks are up again because I think confidence has been restored, right? And at the end of the day, any monetary network is only as good as the confidence that people have in it. Mm-hmm. And, the confidence was shaken in the dollar monetary network today because people saw, like I said, like they're playing fast and loose with monetary policy, zero rates for 10 years. And then suddenly when inflation happens, they jack it up at a historically fast rate. And it seems like these people who are in charge don't really seem to know what the hell they're doing. So Bitcoin went up quite a bit as, I don't know if it's a result of this. What are your thoughts on why it went up? Like I have my theories, but I'm curious to see what you say.
No data or evidence to back this up in the 36 hours like week this has been. But from just my 5 years experience in the crypto markets, I have an 80% plus conviction that it's most likely whales. Because for the people listening at home, long story short, about 1% of the people that are in crypto are called whales, and they were basically old school miners who back in the day on their laptop could mine hundreds of Bitcoin a day, like not in a week, in a day. And now they've kept those. They're literally like, 30-year-old billionaires living in Puerto Rico, next to Peter Schiff and shit. And the same thing too. It's like, oh, hey, a couple banks just blew up, yeah, we just lost all of our VC money. That really speculative thing, Bitcoin, that's only been around for 10 years. Yeah, we should put our remaining, 2 pennies into that because that's a safe haven. Screw gold, screw you 5%, 2-year treasury bond. We're going to throw it into Bitcoin. I saw some of that rambling on Twitter. I'm pretty convicted that it's whales. Again, no data, no chart that Lynn Alden posted. It's just same thing. When back, I've said this ad nauseum, when China or miner FUD has come out on Bitcoin, it's crashed in one day or gone up in one day. And anyone that knows into finance, you just need a very small allocation in anything to, like, even some of the Doge whales, if they probably sold anywhere 3-5% of their stack, you would see Doge go down like 10% in a day because it's slippage. You start selling it, you knock down the price, but then you sold the same dollar amount, so it kind of has a multiplicative like feedback loop on both ends. With that said, like I said, I think it's whales. And I guess like a follow-up question, unless like you had your takes on that, I was also seeing some headlines too over Twitter as this was unwrapping the last week, that there was a couple of small like I guess not a couple small, but a decent amount of crypto firms and companies that were affected by the Silicon Valley Bank and had ties to it. And then I was seeing a lot of articles saying that part of the reason they went down is they had, I think it was something like 150 or 200 million out to FTX, and then some of the other crypto companies they were with were leveraged up and gave them bad loans. And then there was another, CNBC, their reporting is so quality, basically said, Silvergate, Silicon Valley, and then Signature Bank, and they're like, what was the common thread? And then it was in all capitals, crypto. So the part of the article was like, is this going to be leverage or ammo for the monkeys in DC to smack us around with? I don't know, but like I said, I think the quick pump, I think part of it, a big part of it's whales. I think it's average people like us. Like, oh, hey, like this proves like, Bitcoin crypto is needed. It fixes it, blah, blah, blah. But on the reverse end of that, do you think that this spike we have is going to be short lived? We're going to get dumped on, and same thing. Could you see in the next 30, 60 days being this bank was in Silicon Valley, but also it had crypto ties? Do you think the Elizabeth Warrens of the world could come out screaming again?
Well, the situation hasn't actually resolved yet with the banks. I mean, I think yesterday when the banks opened, a lot of people were just holding their breath, hoping that there wasn't going to be like a huge bank run. The issue here is still that if you are a small business and, let's just pretend you like run a farm in Kansas, right? And you have a regional bank. And you have some understanding of like the financial system, and you saw what happened with Silicon Valley Bank, and now you're thinking to yourself, well, I run a business and I have all these employees that depend on me. What happens if my bank is insolvent, right? If it not insolvent, but if it just doesn't have the liquidity it needs because it's heavily underwater, whatever bonds or securities it bought. Maybe I should take my money out of my local bank and put it in JP Morgan, because the thing about, the systemically important financial institutions, the CFIs, is that after Dodd-Frank, they had some very stringent requirements about how well capitalized they had to be, so that if there's a run on the bank, they have enough liquidity to be able to like service any bank runs. And so that's why like the big 8 banks, JP Morgan's at the top of that list, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and, State Street, a bunch of others, they are all well capitalized. They are like doing great, so they're all publicly traded. So we have deep information about what they're holding. Those banks are very closely scrutinized. So again, this is not 2008. The big banks are totally fine. In fact, they have never been stronger. And that's part of the problem, is that if you're a small bank now, you just look weak because you're deeply underwater, because Dodd-Frank didn't force you to be well capitalized, and now interest rates have caused your assets to be underwater. But the big banks, were forced to be well capitalized. So if you are that farmer running a business in Kansas, you're like, well, I know JP Morgan is going to be fine, and I really care about my employees and my business. I don't want, if my bank fails, I mean, it's a great bank and I love the bank manager and everything, but I have a responsibility to my business and my family and my employees. I'm just going to move money to JP Morgan. And I have heard through the grapevine that these big banks, JP Morgan or whatever, they're seeing like so many requests for bank accounts from all of these businesses around the country, because they're all getting spooked by the notion that regional banks may not be solvent anymore. So maybe, and it's not a flood, but it's definitely a trickle. Now, does that trickle turn into like something major? Because there's the Fed funds that were created to provide liquidity to these small regional banks is about $25 billion, right? Now, what happens if that runs out? Then we're screwed, right? Then maybe more money has to be put in, right? And by the way, if that fund is expanded again, as you know, the original Bitcoin Genesis blog had this headline from the Times of London that said, "Chancellor on the brink of a second bailout for banks." So if this fund has to be upgraded again and more money put in, that second bailout that was put on the Bitcoin Genesis block would be happening all over again. We'd just come full circle right back again, right? So what I'm getting at is that I don't know that we're completely out of the woods. I think we were heading straight for a cliff, and the government managed to slam the brakes on, and the car is slowing down, and it at least right now looks like we're not going to go over the cliff. But the car isn't at a stop yet. The car is still sort of like sliding towards the cliff. I'm hoping that it doesn't go over. I have no idea if it'll go over, but that's the danger right now. So we're not out of the woods yet.
Yeah, well, that was gonna be my question for you. Obviously, you know, Peter Schiff says that since 2008, the U.S. government, basically we've had crony capitalism, banks, private businesses, mom and pop, the Fed balance sheet, everyone involved has basically been having a big old party, and they keep drinking and they keep drinking and they don't want to have a hangover. And he says, this is another example of when they could have stopped drinking and the hangover would have kicked in. It would have been a pretty gnarly hangover, and a lot of good people would have gotten screwed just because, same thing. Like you said, it's a farmer in Kansas. He knows how to make tomatoes and grow chickens. He does not know, what a swap is, what a derivative it is. That it doesn't make him a bad person. That's not a stick. Like you said, it's just honest worker. But he could get caught up in this mess. But to your point, obviously I don't want to go over the cliff either. But do you think that this is just like, as a parent, if you don't discipline your child, you're just reinforcing, incentivizing bad behavior? Because it's basically like a lose lose. I know we talk about this at the meetups a lot, but that's one thing. Just even with my friends and family, or whether it's Jerome Powell or these idiots in DC, like whoever, whether it's Biden or, God forbid we have Trump back in office, they're basically stuck between a rock and a hard place. You either do the right thing, you crash the U.S. economy, send the whole global economy to what could be a 3 to 5 year depression for the global economy.
Yeah.
Or you basically print us into hyperinflation, which if the U.S. even hits high inflation, I mean, what's it? Turkey right now is already having 100%. Most of Europe is almost over at 50% a year to date. They could easily hit hyperinflation. So it's like you're screwed either way, and it's just kind of like pick your hard. But I mean, I guess the follow up, like, even though it seemed like they kind of stuffed the pooch a little bit, does that make you nervous that this is just gonna, just kind of like putting your finger behind a wall, you're just blocking up the water more? Do you think they did the right thing, or that's kind of neither here nor there?
No, I think you perfectly hit the nail on the head about like the dilemma of this problem. And there's a political candidate, by the way, that's running for president that I only just heard of during this whole crisis. He became pretty loud on some of the Twitter spaces that I was in, and he had a sort of back and forth argument with David Sachs as well. David Sachs is one of the biggest proponents of a quote unquote bailout, whatever you want to call that. Is it a bailout? It's where now it's semantics if this is a bailout or not, right?
Yeah.
But whatever. And so his name is Vivek Ramaswamy, I think is his name, and he was very much against any sort of government intervention. He's like, the banks should fail. They made stupid bets, and now they should fail. But the thing of it is that the muscle memory for a lot of people when it comes to the banking crisis is 2008. And what happened in 2008 is like the big banks made some really egregious. They created some really stupid products that they thought were sound, but they were not sound. They were basically selling dog shit, and then that dog shit was everywhere in the financial system, and so it almost brought the whole thing down. This time around, it's not the same problem. No one created any toxic shit. The thing that caused this bank to go under was mortgage-backed securities that were good mortgage-backed securities. There was no problem with them. They were in fact earning yield. It was just that the yield they were earning was really low, and they did not respond in an appropriate manner to the hike in interest rates. Now, was that their fault? Yes, I'm sure it was. But also whoever was running this bank was just not like used to an environment where interest rates were jacked up so high. Now that's not an excuse, right? They still should have rebalanced their portfolio. All of that is still true. They just thought that the good times are going to continue to roll. And if you are a bank like Silicon Valley, who have been like, just winning for the last 15 years or 20 years, really, because they're a 40-year-old bank. And for the last 20 years, the tech boom has just resulted in them be turning into like the 16th biggest bank, right? So they're only used to winning. And so, I can at least understand why they, like the cognitive errors they made, right? So everyone's a human. Yes, they made stupid mistakes. There's no excuse, but it's not as if they had just invented some bullshit like, collateral debt obligation, and and they knew it was dog shit, and they engaged in fraud, and they were stealing from someone's mom, or I don't know, someone murdered somebody else. None of that stuff happened, right? It was just poor portfolio management in a milieu that they had never really experienced for 15 years. And they were also hyper concentrated in a sector where the VCs of the tech companies could communicate with each other at the speed of light, right? And these are all like highly sophisticated people. They're not farmers. They're like VC people. That this is what they do. They invest money in companies. So when they saw signs of insolvency issues, or they saw signs of liquidity issues, they were able to like quickly, do a bank run. Right now, farmers aren't as well organized, for example, right? And if you're a small community bank, regional bank in Kansas or whatever, you probably are highly diversified in the kinds of businesses that you lend money out or do business with. This was just not the case with Silicon Valley. So it's a hard one, man. I was coming on the side of you have to like bail them out, I mean, hold your nose and do it, right? Because if you don't, number one, all of these startups go out of business, and there was like 10,000 like startups. I mean, it was, I don't know if it was thousands of startups, it was tens of thousands of jobs. They were all in sectors that were like kind of important for the US economy, because the engine of the U.S. economy a large part of it comes from Silicon Valley. So if you're just going to like neuter all of these companies, then to what extent are you setting back the innovation? I don't know the answer to that. The likes of David Sachs were saying you're going to set it back by a generation, or I don't know if that's true. But the bigger reason I was wanting the feds to come in and do something was not so much that I cared that much about the startups. You can make an argument that they will be fine, and if there's a good startup, they'll find funding elsewhere, yada yada yada. Is the fact that this episode revealed the systemic weakness of these regional banks. And if that's the case, if one bank is going to fail, then bank runs are going to happen in other ones, and that would be a systemic contagion. Now, I don't want there to be a systemic contagion, but you are also correct when you stem the tide like this, or you're just rewarding bad behavior also. So the system is not more robust; it's less robust now. But this comes back to the idea of, well, our monetary network, the dollar monetary network, is just not functioning properly, right? And that's really the underlying diagnosis here, right? So yes, we put a fire out. There was smoke. We put a fire out. But we're still sitting on a ton of gasoline, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the problem, right? So we put this fire out. I didn't want there to be a big explosion. But the fact of the matter is that the monetary network sits on this giant sea of gasoline that could go off at any other time.
Mm-hmm. No, for real.
And the Fed really doesn't have any good tools to like fix the problem, right? So is Bitcoin rallying because people saw this and they're like, listen, our monetary network is god dog shit right now. It's not working. And it almost broke. And if it hadn't been on a weekend, it probably would have broke. Maybe we should invest in a monetary network where we can self-custody, where we know that if we put money into this, bank, which is the bank of Bitcoin, no one's going to just lend it out and make stupid decisions with our money. The optimist in me says that enough people like understood, like, oh, this is where Bitcoin makes a lot of sense. But then the other narrative is, well, people are just risk on because they think the Fed is going to stop, raising interest rates. So I think there's a 50-50 chance of one being true or the other being true. I don't really know. What is your take? Is Bitcoin up because people recognize the dollar monetary network is cracking, or did they buy it because Feds are, we're risk on again and the Fed is not going to raise rates?
This is going to be really stupid. I think it's both and neither. I still think the Fed, like how Dr. Phil talks about this a lot in life. Basically, he's from Monday, Texas, and he says, life is like living in Monday, Texas, in the middle of July. You're on the grass. There's 30 feet of black cement the other side of the grass. You get halfway across that cement and you go, holy shit, I am burning to my knees, are about to fall off. My feet are in totally roasted marshmallow. You are not going to stand in the middle of that road and just melt yourself to the knees. You're going to get your ass back to where you started, or you're going to get across the street and go into where you were. And that's where I think the Fed is right now. I think some people short term think that the Fed is going to pivot now. I think, in my opinion, again, we can check this and roll back the tape in June and see how well this holds up. I think this would be more, back to my point, the black cement top on their feet, like, hey, we need to keep this shit moving, because stuff is breaking, but if we go back to what we're doing 10 years from now, this Silicon Valley thing is going to look like a fart in the wind compared to, if they go back to the 0% interest rate, definitely by the end of the decade, a JP Morgan or Chase would blow up. But, and I guess back to the, is Bitcoin up because people are feeling the pain? Peter Schiff went on a rant this past week, obviously because of the Silicon Valley blowing up. And same thing, man. I give him a lot of heat, but I think the man is on the money with a lot of stuff macroly. Why he doesn't get Bitcoin is I'll be on my deathbed. Hopefully in his lifetime he gets it. He is a Bitcoin bug. He doesn't realize it, but that's another topic for another day. But he says people haven't even felt the pain yet, and I think that's true. Just because, like, same thing. I could go call up a couple of my friends tonight, go shoot up some pool, get some beers. I guarantee you, maybe one of them has heard of this Silicon Valley thing, because people are busy. They got boyfriends, girlfriends, jobs. People are just in Austin trying to keep up with the price of rent and everything. So I think, like I said, it's whales pushing it. I don't even think people have started to feel the pain yet. And I guess on top of that, when you were just talking about, like everyone's like, oh, this example why Bitcoin works, the U.S. monetary system isn't working. I guess as I'm like unpacking this, kind of like helped me a little bit. I might be having to gas it a little bit, but hopefully my point comes across. So, about 24 months ago, it was AMC and Doge, blew up, and then they were the first thing to kind of crack, right? Like the fun money Ponzi stuff of, the 2020, 2021 bull market. And then I would say probably crypto started to go because we're still risk on, and then stocks started to kind of go. And then we saw a little bit of inflation. Then we saw other places like Turkey, Europe, everyone else had big inflation. And then I guess we had back to crypto. We had a lot of the FTX, the Three Arrows, the big blow ups. And then basically, we've had to start having these regional banks. So my long-winded point is it seems like we've had to slowly get those ramp ups. And this goes back to my point where I don't feel like people have felt enough pain. And to your point, I do agree, since the Dodd-Frank in 2008, et cetera, there's been more rules placed on the banks, but even people like Lynn Alden think that the bar has been placed very low so that, yes, they jump over it and pass the test, but it's kind of like having your training wheels on. Take those off and you're going to figure out, how good you are at riding a bike. So, to your question, I don't think we felt enough pain yet. I think this is just a bull trap right now. In stocks are up a little bit, but especially crypto. But to my point, it seems like stuff is kind of ramping up, and Peter Schiff talks about this, that until 1 in 2 Americans are talking about it, that's how we've hit like full bear peak pain, inflation, etc. Let's just fast forward to the rest of the year. Could you see something like a Chase or, God forbid, a Bank of America or JP Morgan blowing up? Like, do you think like it would take something like that for people to be like, oh shit, we're really at ground zero? Or do you think that's like the Fed will literally not allow that to happen? What do you think?
No, those banks are in a very good shape. So let me ask you, if I were to ask you, how much money do you think JP Morgan is sitting on just for like investment, just waiting to buy stuff? Like
billions. I mean, I'm trying
how
to think
many
what
billions?
I mean, I would say, I don't know, like north of 25 bill.
25 billion? Okay, so they're actually sitting on $1.1 trillion of cash.
Jesus Christ, really? Wow.
Yeah. So they're in great shape. So I think, a lot of the times when you have, something like the great financial crisis 2008 happened, you start to like look for patterns of things happening today that map onto what happened in 2008. And it's just not the same situation. I know it's banking and all that, but the big banks are great. In fact, they're getting more money than ever. All of the Silicon Valley, if you're a VC in Silicon Valley, right, you're just moving all your money over to JP Morgan. So JP Morgan just got, some $200 billion more of deposits, assuming everyone from, Silicon Valley leaves, that's $200 billion of deposits. All of that money is going to some giant banks. So the giant banks, the big banks, are just going to benefit even more. And a lot of the Dodd-Frank stuff has made sure that those banks are called the money markets. So they are well capitalized, so that if there's a liquidity crunch, they're able to supply money. And at the end of the day, you need to be putting money in something. Like you take it out of a shitty bank, you're gonna put it in a good bank, right? So money has to go to some place, right? These institutions are now watched with such a fine-tooth comb, all their accounts and everything, and all of the products that they make, that there doesn't really seem to be, at least, maybe these are famous last words, but at this point, at least, all of the people who are very familiar with the GFC of 2008 don't see any problems at all with the big banks. They've never had more money. Like I said, JP Morgan has
do you think
over
part
$1
of that
trillion.
Do you think part of that from '08? Correct me if I'm wrong here. I'm pretty sure it's still the case. The U.S. government got stake in the banks that they gave money to because we've said, in previous episodes, they basically gave all of them blank checks that were kind of equal because they didn't want the public, to our point, knowing which banks were good, which ones were bad, and then causing runs. So they gave all of them kind of like 10, 20 billion blank checks. But they're like, hey, when you pay us, like we get stake in this and then you pay us back. But to my knowledge, this U.S. government, like those big ones, they still own. Well, this is my point. Do you think part of it is because of that? But with that too, it's like, well, even though they might be stable now, the U.S. government, they're like the U.S. government can't do basic math. And I mean, I agree with you. I don't like. I think if J.P. Morgan went under this year, we're going to Mad Max. But I guess like when I like ask that question, it's just like my point is like so like FTX and then Sam Bankman-Fried and Three Arrows, all that crazy Celsius Terra stuff blew up. Everyone's like, oh my God, it's Mad Max. Everything's done tomorrow. Blah blah blah. And things were quiet. Next thing you know, everyone's talking about 100K Bitcoin again and cocaine, Lambos, etc. And then something else happens. So like my point is like, we've talked about the psychology. It's just funny how like I think even Sanat talked about in the chat. He's like, it was so funny 2 weeks ago. Everyone was like so confident, and then it's just like if you told people that there'd basically be a run on the banks, they'd laugh you. And that's my point. It's just like I think people are just so hot and cold. And this goes to my point too. It's like ever since COVID happened, it's just the macro psychology of people, not even finance, but just like with everything, man. Like I've told you, I have enough confidence in myself. When people ask me about Russia, Ukraine, I say I am anti-war everything. We are too technologically advanced. With that said, gun to head, I couldn't name 10 Ukrainian cities. Man, the second Russia, Ukraine popped off, I didn't know it, but I knew so many Ukrainian experts all of a sudden. It was crazy. And that's just my point. Like I was asking about the ramp ups because it just seems like we keep ramping up and people go hot and cold. And I'm like, what's going to be the thing where people are like, because for '08, it was Lehman Brothers. I think once Lehman Brothers hit, people were like, "Oh shit, this is really bad." Because before it was just like Bear Stearns and other like kind of C B level banks or whatever, and that's just why I was asking because it's like everyone's like, "Okay, they kind of stuffed the turkey, everything's fine." I'm like, well, we were freaking out about all the smaller stuff, and maybe I need to like kind of double check and do some homework on this. But I feel like we just keep ramping up, and people freak out, and then we calm down, and then something else happens, and that's why I was just asking. I'm like, what's going to be that straw that breaks the back? And I'll give, like I said, Peter Schiff credit because I still think, I hope I'm wrong, I just still think there's going to be one big thing this year where it's going to be like, oh shit, this is the one.
Yeah, maybe. There's a lot of people that think about this stuff. They're all looking, at the horizon and seeing what sort of thing might happen that could, derail us all. This banking crisis that occurred was perhaps one of those things. Maybe it was a thing that nobody actually anticipated. At this point, though, I mean, who knows if Russia decides to launch nuclear weapons, right? I mean, that's going to cause a lot of like issues, right? If China decides to do an invasion, I mean, it could be anything. Maybe there's another pandemic. The definition of a black swan is you literally don't see it coming at all.
Don't see it, yeah.
And then it happens, and you're like, oh shit, that's something I should have maybe kept an eye out for. But at least for now, though, I don't. Again, by definition, a black swan is something you can't see coming. But at least for now, I'm not seeing anything on the horizon that makes me think, oh, this is what's going to bring us under. The biggest issue with the whole interest rate stuff is that inflation is sort of, just running rampant and the need to cool the economy down. But, another way of thinking about it is the whole Kathy Wood school of thought, which is that the innovation is increasing at such a frenetic pace that technology is as well. And technology is inherently deflationary. And that is going to be something that will get inflation under control. Just we out-innovate the problem. We don't use monetary policy to fix the problem, but technology fixes it for us, right? So just case in point, just today, I know in private chats I rave and rant about ChatGPT and the AI stuff. As you know, I'm like heavily into this stuff. But ChatGPT 4 just came out today. That's the upgrade, right? That people were all waiting for. And I just was playing around with it right before I hopped on this podcast, and man, it's quite phenomenal. Like it scores the 90th percentile on biology advanced placement stuff. It can pass the bar exam. It can pass the medical boards. It can pass, the math Olympiad stuff. There's all of and a lot of these tech companies are going to just be plugging into ChatGPT. and improving their products with it, right? So there may be just a wave of innovation that comes out in the next year or so that brings down the cost of production. Like robotics could be an excellent example of this, right? So if our robotics and robotics and AI are closely linked, if they ramp up and suddenly factories are basically run by two humans and they produce the same amount of stuff that it would have taken 1,000 humans to produce, that is hugely deflationary. And it brings down the cost of things quite a bit. And so in that case, the monetary network system of the dollar works perfectly fine because you can keep interest rates, very low, and you can goose the whole monetary network, and it works just fine, and only because you have the underlying base layer of technology that allows for that sort of funny money stuff to happen. So that's one of the perhaps differences that we have in the modern world that we didn't have, say, in Roman times or the British times where currency was devalued, because everyone's looking at those times. I'm like, well, look what happens when you start devaluing your currency and you start printing more. You get inflation, your money becomes worthless. But one of the things that those civilizations didn't have that we have is exponentially growing technology. And Raoul Paul talks about this a lot as well, is that we have entered an exponential age of technology where the speed at which things are moving in terms of technology is just, it's doubling every 2 years or so. So if Kathy Wood is right, that we don't have to worry too much about inflation because technology is going to fix it for us, then a lot of these problems go away. The inflation problem definitely goes away, right? I mean, imagine if you have robotics that just does food production. Suddenly food is 30% cheaper, 40, 50% cheaper. Suddenly it's a tenth of the cost it was, right, 10 years from now. And not only that, but that also hopefully allows the economy to go up as well. You can export stuff. And so I've been playing around with like this AI stuff, right? And I'm doing things that would have, I would have like had to hire 4 people like to do audio here and to do video editing there and to do all this other stuff. AI is taking care of a lot of those problems. So that's the optimist in me that says that, maybe we are faking it till we make it with our dollar monetary network, and maybe we still squeak a way out of it without destroying and breaking everything. Certainly, like there's innovation is moving fast enough to hope that something like that would happen. But again, that's the optimist in me, right? Optimistic when it comes to technology. Maybe I'm being overly optimistic, but that's my take. Is I don't think that the goose is necessarily cooked because you have this other thing that you have to account for, which is technology.
It's a weird one because it's, to your point, technology, like we said, like these 2 laptops, 40 years ago would have literally cost like half the freaking, NASA space budget. And now it's like, a couple of weeks worth of work. On the flip side, though, it's weird. Certain things like healthcare and college have gotten disproportional where it's like MIT puts all their stuff online for free. Why are you charging me, years worth of income, etc. But you kind of like hit on a note to kind of open up this can of worms because I don't know if we ever gone down this rabbit hole, like even at the meetups. Isaac talks about he's a big Tesla guy, big automation, blah blah blah, where he's like, it'd be really cool in like 20 or 40 years, where or like 20 years where a shit ton of jobs are automated 50% and people have all this free time. Like you said, we're playing hypothetical game theory here. Stuff's cheaper. You can literally just hit a phone, a Tesla bot comes, picks you up, you pay it in Bitcoin or Ripple, whatever, drives you to Dallas, you can just pass out, fall asleep, etc. On the flip side of that, when Andrew Yang was running, one thing he talked about is the displacement of people. Even though with technology make things cheaper, you have all these disenfranchised people, and even though it sounds cool sitting on your ass, a lot of people, like we said, what is money? End of the day, it's an accounting system, it's kind of psychology, blah blah blah. If you have all this automation going on in AI and all these people get displaced real quick, sit on your ass and playing video games sounds cool. Well, COVID showed that about 6 months in that kind of gets really dry, and Andrew Yang talked about that, giving people $1,000 dividend and blah blah blah. But like, what is your take on that? Do you think we could almost have a great reset where we basically kind of start back from zero with all this AI automation? Do you think there's going to be, just like with any technological revolution, there's going to be some hiccups along the way? Or do you think, like, same thing too, if this AI stuff gets way too out of the control, even if stuff is getting cheaper and just a lot of people's lives get more convenient, automated, because so many people have been displaced, they don't have a purpose anymore, they basically cause like a revolution? Or do you think it's kind of too hard to tell right now?
Well, It's definitely going to be very disruptive if people, end up losing factory jobs, for example, right? Workers who have worked 30 years in a factory probably are not going to be able to get retrained to do something else. So I'm sympathetic to the whole Andrew Yang idea of like universal basic income. But the other thing is, hopefully, the things that become deflationary are the things that people really need a lot, like things like housing, education, food production, energy. If you have those things taken care of, if it costs you $100 to get internet, to get electricity, to get education, to get all of your food for the month for a family of four, and all of that just cost $100 because robots do everything now, right? And a robot never gets tired, and you just you could work super fast. And again, I'm not talking about like this is happening next year. I'm talking about like maybe even 10 years from now, right? Because things are moving so fast in AI and tech that you know the stuff that ChatGPT can do today, people wouldn't have guessed 2 years ago that this technology was coming, right? The layman, or okay, maybe some people would, but 4 years ago we would have not thought that it was coming, and yet here it is. And it's just getting fast. I mean, ChatGPT just kind of took over the world in
Like
November,
a month.
and now the next version is here. And now the
Yeah.
next version is here already, right? It's not even like 5 months later, and they've already have a massive upgrade. It's not even a small upgrade. So ChatGPT 4 can now ingest, the prompt can actually now look at and understand and play with 25,000 words. You can give it a small novel and just start talking to it about the novel, right? Um, so I don't know. It's going to be highly disruptive. You really hit it on the head with the whole like meaning and purpose thing. If you lose your job because you have the factory doesn't need you anymore, then what do you do with your time? I think a lot about the so-called age of abundance, where basic things like food, energy, shelter, education are taken care of because they're just so cheap. Like water is a great example, right? I mean, 400 years ago, how hard did you have to work to make sure you had access to safe drinking water? And now you could probably drink out of your toilet and you'd probably not get sick, right? Because drinking, water is just so easy. You just turn the tap on. And you don't pay that much for it, right? I mean, I'm sure you have a water bill, but you're not paying like, you don't even think about it, right? Oh, this is my water bill, right? So that's an example of something that's very important to human life, right? And I know that because I've visited villages in poor countries where, some woman has to get a camel and, go a mile to the well. And I mean, that just takes up half her day. And then, take it back. And then they have to store it somewhere as well. And it could also be dirty, right? Because the well could be contaminated with E. coli. That problem is completely solved in the Western world at a cost that you don't even think about anymore. And what if that also happens with energy? What if it also happens with food? Because food production can definitely be automated. That's not highly complicated at all. You can have vertical farms that are pretty much run by robots. I think that's coming. So, if those people's basic needs are completely cared for or taken care of, then to what extent, do you have social instability? If you got food, shelter, electricity, housing, education, access, and even healthcare, hopefully we'll get way better with AI, right? Because we'll have better cures for things, and we won't be just putting band-aids on a whole bunch of things. We'll actually be fixing real diseases because AI will allow us to design proteins that, fix diseases that were completely intractable just 10 years ago. I've been telling people for some time now that I really sincerely believe that we'll have a cure for most cancers within 10 years, right? And if you can also somehow fix obesity, there's also a lot of breakthroughs in obesity medicine that have come out in the last, just couple of years, where people lose massive amounts of weight, with some of these new anti-obesity medications. We will find out, what side effects they may have in the years to come, but at least for now, they appear to be safe and effective. And maybe Alzheimer's is another thing. Maybe if we find out how to make an 80-year-old feel like a 40-year-old again. So all of these things are now on the table. I'm not saying any of them are definitely going to happen, but this was the stuff of science fiction in the 1980s, and now it's the stuff of serious scientific inquiry and engineering. It's not like, oh, you must be an idiot for thinking that you can extend lifespan, or you could like grow an entire country's worth of wheat in a warehouse, right? For example. None of those things are like now the realm of science fiction. Now people are looking at it like, oh, how could I solve this engineering task? Anyway, we kind of like went off a tangent on crypto and monetary networks, but it's somewhat tied in, because if if technology allows for a deflationary force to occur, which is what Kathy Wood's basic thesis is, then this whole money printing and the Fed is causing inflation, all of that stuff kind of goes away. And it was already a good example is with Japan, right? Like I bring this up a couple of times. Like Japan just like went on a hyperinflationary printing binge for like 2 decades, and only now are they seeing inflation. So for two whole, and Japan, as you know, is like a highly technologically advanced society, and maybe to some extent that was what prevented inflation from occurring, because they just rained money on everything, and they just could not get inflation to go up. Everything was getting deflationary. So I know a lot of people think about inflation as well. If you print more money, inflation will happen. But I think you have to account for the deflationary effects of escalating technological advances that are just starting to accelerate even more. And if technology can cause a deflationary effect, then I don't think we have to worry too much about money causing an inflationary effect. I mean, again, I'm being optimistic again. Maybe I'm just in a good mood today for some reason, but I thinking a bit too optimistically maybe. But so that's sort of my take. I don't know if you had any thoughts on any of that.
Yeah, I guess the only thing too, because obviously, we talked about the psychology. Like, don't get me wrong. Part of my conviction in Bitcoin is obviously from a self-sovereign, just return ROI standpoint. It's like I put in X amount of energy, I want to get X plus or X squared, blah 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 out. But part of it too, I told people like right now, there's people that have more Bitcoin than me, and more Ethereum. Just I'm never gonna have the net worth of Jamie Dimon. I sleep fine knowing like that. It's like as long as I can cover my basic needs, like you said, a little bit extra to do my own, buy ammonia salts and like heavyweight stick metal bullshit. But another part is just like we talked about this, like people know what game they're playing, they enter the sandbox and they're cool with it. And I guess this is like another thing for you too. Like, because I was just kind of thinking about this while you were unpacking like all the stuff AI and tech and farms and everything could happen like in our lifetime. Like you said, this isn't science fiction. This is shit that could literally happen by like 2035, which is scary and cool at the same time. But do you think we could get to like a lot of people talk about AI and chat GPT of the worlds, they can crack Bitcoin and blah blah blah. The more I've talked with you and just the Isaac and Sanat that are group, do you think we could get to a point too in the next 20 years where like crypto almost isn't needed because, like, for lack of a better word, the AI and chat GPT, it's not that they crack them, they just eat their lunch money, where you, like you said, if everything is so abundant, people almost don't even care about printing money or inflation anymore, like just because everything's so abundant and it's just on repeat with robots. So do you think, like, instead of even a lot of people talk about, the AIs of the world are going to crack Bitcoin and, it's, the whole 51% hash rate goes to shit. Do you think like the biggest enemy proponent, I guess you could say, could almost be a good turnout, but do you think like same thing, 20 years where just everything is so abundant just because of technology and AI that like Bitcoin almost goes to the wayside? Or do you think it's something where even, I mean, and that's the thing too. Do you put like Bitcoin in the same like revolutionary social bucket as AI and Chat GPT, or just kind of too early to tell with everything? Because I know I haven't been to the meetups the last 2 weeks, but I know like the last month or so, every time I've seen Isaac, he's just been unpacking like all this AI stuff. Like you, he's been going down the rabbit hole. So,
Well, one thing that's not going to be abundant in the future is Bitcoin, because there's only 21 million, remember. That's not going to change. No, I think one of the biggest innovations of Bitcoin, I mean, besides its being decentralized and non-sovereign, is the ability to self-custody, right? Just like you can put a bar of gold under your bed and it's definitely yours, you can self-custody Bitcoin in a way that the dollar system really doesn't allow you to do, unless you're just hoarding like bags of cash, right? Which is not practical. So I think there's a lot of utility in that. So it doesn't, even if you put aside the inflationary deflationary argument for a second, the idea that you don't have to trust a bank not to screw up its books and make stupid investment decisions with customer money, just like Silicon Valley Bank did. That whole thing just is, equated away. You're like, okay, I don't trust anybody. I just want to self-custody. I'm just going to dig a hole in some part of my property and I'm just going to put my seed phrase there, whatever it is, right? Bury it somewhere. I think that is something that, it's innovations are going to be able to find a replacement for that. You either own your own money or you don't. right? And Bitcoin is one of those things where you actually have the ability to really own it yourself, to really self custody yourself. So I think there's a great deal of cachet to that. I don't think that's going to go away anywhere. Um, so I definitely still see a future where Bitcoin has a huge role to play. The other thing as well is, we talk about this the sovereign individual quite a bit as well. Is if you have a AI powered system, where the energy, food, and all the other stuff is cut. The marginal cost keeps going down and down and down. Then after a while, like what the hell do you need the government for anymore, right? And
Mm-hmm.
if you just have some Bitcoin, if you have all your basic needs met, um, maybe you just decide to found you. I mean, we're going to talk about the network state on this podcast hopefully in a couple of weeks, but maybe just a whole bunch of people get together and form their own sort of states, right? Power is getting more and more decentralized, and there when you have communities that are decentralizing away from incompetent governments, and if the events of the last few days have taught us anything, last few years I should say has taught us anything, it's that the people in charge are really kind of stupid people. They're just
Yeah.
monkeys in suits is all they are. They have no idea what the hell they're doing. They're not smarter than anybody else at all. Information has become democratized, and access to knowledge is democratized now. They don't really have any more information than me and you do. Jerome Powell doesn't have some secret database that he only has access to. We all have access to the same information. So as power is moving away from governments and into the individuals, I think there's still going to be a need for a decentralized monetary network like Bitcoin that allows for self-sovereignty, because you just don't trust the government to hold your money, because why would you? These guys are just monkeys in suits. So I think there's still, no matter how far technology goes, there's always going to be a place for self-sovereign money. Wanted to sort of change the conversation just a little bit and ask you about another thing that we haven't yet talked about is, um, Signature Bank also was closed down on Sunday. Now, we all know that Silvergate, there was a big blow up, and, this whole meltdown happened in public. Silicon Valley Bank also, within a period of 72 hours, very publicly, went down. Signature Bank, though, very quietly got shut down on Sunday. Like, no one, it was on no one's radar that Signature Bank was an issue, and then very quietly, without much explanation, was shut down. Now, you must, I'm sure, have seen the Barney Frank comments on this. Are you aware? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Well, I mean, he basically called it was just like a prolo bailout, and everyone's like, it's not a bailout. It's like, well, what the hell is it then? He's like, you're pregnant or you're not, you know?
No, 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 no. So Barney Frank was on the board of Signature Bank. Okay, so he was an ex senator, I believe, and he was on the board of Signature Bank. And Barney Frank said that when it was shut down, like we were kind of caught by surprise. We didn't really have any sort of issues or problems. The feds just came and said we're shutting you down. And he said that I think that the reason they shut down Silvergate and they shut down Signature Bank is that they wanted to send an anti-crypto message, that if you're dealing with crypto, then you're too risky, and so we're going to shut you down because you're causing a systemic risk. And again, Signature Bank, Silvergate, everyone saw it implode. They loaned out to FTX. That's fine. Signature Bank, we have no idea like what the problem was. And Barney Frank said that we didn't really have any issues. They just kind of came in and closed us down. Now, by the way, Barney Frank is the Frank in the Dodd-Frank bill. That's who he is, and he was the chairman of Signature Bank, who just like closed. I mean, you can't make this shit up, right? He said that maybe they were just trying to send an anti-crypto message, and crypto Twitter like really like went and ran with this, right? It was for Barney Frank, it was just a throwaway statement in an interview. He didn't like come on the podium and says the government is attacking Bitcoin. He basically there was one statement of one sentence he said of a long-range interview. But crypto Twitter is like, well, there you go. Choke point 2.0 is in full swing, where the government is coming after any bank that will do banking with crypto, and they're attacking us, right? What is your gut instinct on that whole, narrative?
Yeah, sorry. I guess I was thinking of something else, but I mean, it's yeah, like I was telling you, like a lot of the we talked about ad nauseum when Charles was talking about the Doge mania. Hey guys, we need to relax. We're past this. We're just giving the monkeys in DC ammunition to rocks to throw at us, and then we have all the blow ups we talked about ad nauseum. Um, it's hard because I think the problem when you're in a space, you can make correlations. You know, the yellow Lamborghini theory, like how many yellow Lambos do you see in a day? None. If I paid you $1,000 every time you saw one, you would see them all of a sudden. No, you know, like you see what you aim at. Um, like I think I saw like some stuff about that on Twitter too, where well, at least not the signature bank, but like I said with the Silicon Valley, you know, a lot of people were saying like, oh, the main reason this failed because it had some crypto relations, or oh, when the Elizabeth Warrens and the AOCs up in Congress see this, they're gonna be, you know, it's, like you said, 1,000 VCs, but they're just gonna see the couple crypto companies. Um, Again, could that be true from, you know, like people in Congress perspective? Yeah, but then like, you know, you and I all know this, like even though it sucks what's happened in the last, let's call it, month with all these banks, how many bailouts has Ethereum and Bitcoin and Cardano, like, so this just kind of proves the case. It's like, yeah, we have our own issues, we have our blowups, but this goes to my point. We've and since I've been in this space, there's been two or three blowups, and like whoever is the cream of the crop, the Litecoin, Ethereums, Cardanos, the Bitcoins, they keep rising, and all the shit coins, they disappear into the next bull market. So yeah, maybe could some people, again, you might have to send me a link and I just dig into that more. But I just find it funny too, because it's like, please show me the bailouts we've gone. Like again, the helicopter money of 2020 that definitely ran to crypto. But a lot of that money's also left the crypto space, just like it has left everywhere else too.
Mm.
So I think it just goes to my point too, where it's, I'm like you, I'm kind of, even though a lot of shit's hit the fan recently, I'm in a pretty optimistic mood because all these banks and all these blue collar, you know, AAA suits, and you know their boats are taking on water, and you know we're still chugging along. And to your point, you know, we were even having the debate of, you know, we're up right now, is that because of whales, of because of plebs? So yeah, I mean, same thing too. Again, I am not surprised in the next 12 months if AOC and Elizabeth Warren's in Congress, they come out swinging more. Like I said, I didn't hear that exactly, that the signature bank was purposely stopped because of crypto related. It wouldn't surprise me if someone had that intent or was trying to imply that intent. But I think it's the equivalent of a dog chasing its tail, or you know, it's like trying to run backwards at full steam. It's like cool, but we never really needed the help anyway, you know.
Yeah, it is going to be interesting to see what happens in the weeks to come, right? Because if the interest rates are going to at least pause, if not come down. I don't think they're coming down anytime soon, but Jerome Powell might
Mm-hmm.
just say, all right, we're just going to stop it here. We're just going to hold it here and see what happens. Because, you know, every time interest rates go up, all of these bonds and securities these banks were holding, the value keeps going down. For every basis point interest rates go up, there's a certain dollar amount that these bonds go down by. So if Jerome Powell comes out on whatever he's coming out in March and says, okay, we're going up another 50 points or 25 points, you can calculate now, because now everyone's paying attention to this, because, you know, with this bank run, calculate now by how much all these regional banks are underwater. You just run the numbers, like, okay, another 50 base, these guys are down another $20 billion or whatever it is, right? So everyone knows that now, and he might just say, okay, you know, rates are pretty high already. Why don't we just keep them where they are? We're just going to keep them here for a few months. And if that's the case, the rally that we had in Bitcoin the last 2 days, maybe that's because people are thinking, well, here we go. This is a decentralized, self-sovereign, self-custodial monetary network that is better than this, you know, banking system that we have that almost collapsed. Maybe that's the narrative, or maybe it's just, you know, it's time to get risk on again, because the government has basically said, okay, we're done raising, and we're even going to do some quantitative easing, because when, you know, they just basically loan out to banks based on collateral that they're pricing at par, which is just ridiculous. That's a form of quantitative easing. They're putting liquidity into the system in a sense, right? There's more money now in the system as a result of that move. So if that's the case, then we maybe, you know, the markets maybe risk on, and, you know, Bitcoin will only go up from here. I know Plan B was looking at charts, and he was like, hey, look, based on all these charts, you know, we've turned the corner. We're only going to go up. So what I'm getting at is that all that is true, and over the next few weeks, Bitcoin does go up, and it hits 40 or 30,000 or whatever, and it's above the bear market support band, and everyone is like singing Kumbaya all over again, and the laser eyes are back.
Yeah.
Well, now they're back in a milieu where the government has really been taking a sledgehammer to a lot of crypto industry players, suing people left and right. And so the urgency of doing something about it heightens. Now, when when people are in a bear market, nobody cares. I mean, there's not a lot of market participants. But what happens if Bitcoin doubles from here, from now to the summer? Gary Gensler is going to be like, shit, I need to put some rules down here.
Blow another
I need to make sure. Yeah, because the more the market goes up in valuation, the more the market cap goes up, the more whatever concerns they have about crypto causing, systemic contagion or whatever goes up as well. And so I'm wondering if it's going to accelerate the regulatory scrutiny, regulatory fights, or if it's going to accelerate compromise to some extent. So they're going to say, okay, these are securities, this is how we're deciding this stuff. Maybe Congress passes a bill because they can't let the market cap go all the way up to 3 trillion again, like last year or to the 2020, 2021. And then say, okay, everything's a security, you guys are all fucked, right? That because they're going to destroy $3 trillion worth of like value. So it's going to be very interesting to see how the regulators start behaving once the market, if the market continues to go up, because they're basically probably will feel pressed to act faster. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens if the market continues to rally. I was actually very surprised by the rally. I was convinced, by the way, on Friday or Saturday that everything was going to collapse. And let me share your story with you.
Yeah,
that was very instructive. So I have a little bit of money on Kraken. It's not a lot, but I'm like, I'm just going to keep it there because, if I'm going to diversify my risk appetite, most everything is in cold storage, and that's like in a very secure location. And that's long term, and I haven't touched that for years. But I have a little bit of cash on Kraken. And then when the banking thing happened, I'm like, oh shit, maybe Kraken does business with Silicon Valley. Like, why not, right? Because they're like a California-based company. So I'm like, well, maybe I should go and get my cash out. And so what I did was I converted it to USDC, and and then I moved the USDC to my private ledger. And as you well know, USDC also depegged over the weekend because they also had $3.3 billion of their own money.
What did they get down to again? I think you told me it was like 92 cents or how?
87 was the worst.
That's bad.
87 was the worst. But here's what happened is when I got the money on my ledger, I was following this whole story very closely, and USDC was still at $1. But I'm like, shit, if they have money in there, this thing could depeg and this could just go to zero. I don't know what's going to happen. It's so uncertain. Let me go ahead and get rid of it. Let me get rid of my USDC and turn it into something else. And so I'm like, oh, I was pissed off because now I have to move this money back to Kraken and then convert it to something else, some other stable coin. And I was like, well, if I move it to Kraken with all this stuff going on, and maybe Kraken just freezes everything, right? Because that could happen. I mean, anything's possible, right? We all hear these stories about exchanges going down in times like crises, right? So I don't want my money stuck there. So, a very interesting sort of thing happened where I realized, why am I going to Kraken? I have USDC. It's ERC20, like Ethereum-based USDC. Why don't I just go to Uniswap and swap it over there for something? Why am I sending it to Kraken, right? And it kind of dawned on me that I had more trust in using Uniswap to do the trade than I did moving it to Kraken and then moving it back out again. Now, Uniswap is not like some, paragon of virtue. They've banned wallets and everything as well. But the only risk there was when I was using Uniswap was like the risk of the thing I was converting it to. There wasn't the risk that, Uniswap will take my money or freeze my account or anything like that. So it is really eye-opening that in a time of severe financial stress where it was not really clear at all what was happening with the banks, I felt way more comfortable using Uniswap in that situation than I did using Kraken. And I'm wondering if that's some sort of a harbinger for the future, is that when there's severe financial strain, a decentralized network where liquidity is like pulled together by the users is a better way of doing business than a centralized network which would just go down because of severe financial stress. So that was a very eye-opening moment because I was like in a real dilemma. I'm like, man, I got it out of Kraken because I'm afraid of putting it in there. Now I'm moving it back in to convert it. And I'm like, shit, I'll just use Uniswap, and I used it. And I am, for the first time in my life, I have Tether now.
Oh, man, there it is.
That's how desperate I was. I'm like, man, I really don't like holding Tether. I trust them even less. But this was it was a crisis situation, right? It was
Yeah.
like,
Well, and I
uh,
think, we're giggling about this, and, like just knowing you, I know like you didn't put anything on crack and you couldn't afford to light on fire.
yeah,
But we're like kind of
yeah,
laughing about this. But to your point, let's put this on a magnifying glass, times 1,000 or a million. And this is where the Jerome Powells and everyone from, Obama to Trump to Biden and all these idiots in DC are, like we talked about, they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. And this is kind of where things capitulate and break and stuff. But I also saw on Twitter, it's funny you brought that up. A lot of people were saying that this could also start a stablecoin war or stablecoin adoption. But to your point too, and this is why I just keep bringing it up, like Peter Schiff, there needs to be enough capitulation to break. It was after '08, it's not like Bitcoin had this huge spike. Like literally, if you weren't like a AAA top level like MIT, Harvard coder, you didn't know what Bitcoin was and etc. But as '08 unrolled and people are like, none of these bankers lost their jobs. They've been given all this free taxpayer money. They're not doing shit with it. They're just buying back their own stock, which used to be like one of the most just egregious things you could do on Wall Street, went mainstream. And then same thing too is just like whether you're still in the Middle East or just like all this stuff. As I felt like just as shit kept unfolding, the adoption curve went to it. And you bring up a good point. Right now we're seeing that to your point, whether it's just the Silicon Valley Bank or the Signature Bank, and whether they were worried about crypto or that was a smokescreen is irrelevant. They froze some stuff. To your point, if this maybe happens 3 or 4 more times in the next 12 months, people would be like maybe even it's my mom, my aunt, I don't really understand what's behind the hood on Uniswap, but to your point, like you trust that in Tether way more than you trust a centralized entity, and that's the point where it's like I was
well,
harping
I
on this
didn't say I
earlier.
trusted Tether. I said I was just desperate. But
But
yeah,
but
Uniswap. To your
But
point,
but
yeah,
to our point, man. I mean, most people in life don't do shit because they like it. You're just stuck between two shitty options, and what are you
yeah,
more desperate for? But this is the
right.
point where it's like Peter Schiff. I think we're gonna need more capitulation, and it's gonna be ugly. But to your point, I think people are gonna be like, you know what? Okay, let me give this crypto thing a crack. And same thing too. Like you and I've talked about this. Even most idiots on tech savvy people like us, you can interact with Uniswap or Shapeshift. I mean, even like MetaMask, some stuff like that, and like a Ledger and a Treasure. You can basically over a weekend jump in that pool and come out, and you're working it like 90%. But I mean, it's funny you bring that up because I think that's just like a good thread on what we were just saying. It's like there's a lot of capitulation, and people are wondering like, where's all the crypto adoption come? And it comes from people stuck in crappy situations, and they're just
Mm.
desperate for something. So I know, like I was like you, it's like I'm pretty optimistic. I've had a lot of work this week, but it's like basically we had a bank freeze and a bank bailout, and Bitcoin's up 15%. Whether why that's happening is irrelevant. It's up, but it's like, same thing. We don't need a bailout. We don't need help. And I'm pretty
Yeah.
confident right now. And it's funny you say that. I think it's just a tale of two cities. I feel like half of crypto right now is ecstatic, everything's good. And then the other half is just like, holy shit, I need to get my money out of everything right now and just like bury my treasure in the backyard.
Yeah, I was watching this podcast called The Compound, which is like really, it's a great podcast. I listen to it all the time. And one of the hosts was saying, like, this weekend, like there was two kinds of people. There's one kind of person that says, I need to call JP Morgan and put some money in there. And there's another kind of person that says, I need to buy some Bitcoin.
Basically, I mean, it's that's the
So
funny
yeah, that's where we're
funny
at.
thing. And that's the funny thing. It's like you can't tell right now, even as the crypto. I would say the JP Morgan thing is more rational, but it's like which one was the better choice? You're kind of gonna have to wait
Yeah,
5 years,
time will
but
tell. Time will tell. Time will tell. All right, man. On that optimistic note, I think we're done for today. We'll do it again next week, and hopefully, the financial system will still be here, so we can still talk about it. We're all not all out, killing all the deer population for fresh meat.
yeah.
So, but good talk, man.
No, as always, man. So, yeah, hope for the worst, prepare for the best, and yeah, we'll see if the civilization's still here come next week.
All
But
right, man.
I'm optimistic.
All right, man. I'll see you next week.